I'm going to call this debate to order. On resolved, Braver Angels should focus on creating better fights, not harmony. The first couple of speeches have been pre-selected, and then I'll let you know when that opens up. It's basically after the first two. So I'm looking for a speech in the affirmative. Affirmative means you agree. Braver Angels should go for better fights, not harmony. And so for that, I'm going to call on Elizabeth Dahl. Elizabeth, go ahead and unmute. You have 4 minutes.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair. I am going to argue in the affirmative because I believe that Braver Angels needs to focus more on better fights and healthier conflict than on the harmony of common ground. I believe that both are absolutely necessary to achieving political depolarization. And I believe that they are both equally necessary, but I believe that we are often better, and depolarization organizations within the industry are often better at focusing on finding common ground on values and concerns, and tend to paper over or minimize actual conflict over policy and on beliefs in favor of the common ground of values and concerns. And this is a problem for a variety of reasons, one of which is that it creates an opening for partisan activists to argue that polarization is in fact not a problem. In fact, polarization is a good thing, because finding common ground on values with people is really just legitimizing extremist views. You aren't actually discovering that they have extreme views, these activists argue, because you focused on the common ground and you never discovered how crazy they really are. Whereas healthy conflict allows you to discover your differences and to respect them and to accurately understand them, just as you discover your common ground in unexpected and expected places. And you care about each other and see each other as people because of that common ground that you have. And that enables you to have the trust that is required to engage in healthier conflict with each other and elucidate your accurate differences on policy. It doesn't mean that you cannot work together. In fact, it makes the clarity of what you can work together on all the more clear. And it makes the boundaries of your friendship, of your relationship, and the context of how and why you care about each other, and the strength of that relationship, caring about each other across divide, that much stronger. After all, if you fail to understand what the divide is that is between you, are you truly caring for someone across it? Healthy conflict ensures that we learn from each other in a really thorough way, and that we accurately understand the differences that exist between us, and that we continue to cross the partisan divide based on the common ground and the care and the understanding that we've found through the values and concerns and the harmony that we sought to begin the conversation. But healthy conflict is incredibly necessary. The other thing that often happens is that people think that they believe in the inherent worth of every individual. But when they're confronted by their political enemies, by people who believe things they see as extreme, they fail to live that out. When you focus primarily on harmony, people are not given the opportunity to really be introspective about their own behavior and improve their own behavior. Healthy conflict ensures that people do the hard work that is required for true depolarization, because it requires them to be aware that people have views that are still in conflict with theirs, and yet they are friends, yet they are in relationship, and yet there is harmony in that relationship. So in conclusion, I believe that both of these things are necessary, harmony and better fights. But ultimately, I believe we need to focus more on better fights, because I think that's someplace that the depolarization industry lacks, and it's something I think we could improve. We don't want Americans to compromise their beliefs in healthy conflict, after all. We want them to be direct, accurate, and transparent about them. We're not asking people to change their opinions through conflict. We're just asking you to hold them curiously. That is the meaning, after all, of depolarization. We're asking people ultimately to continue to have passionate arguments, because that is the crux of depolarization, is disagreement and care across those differences, and understanding that despite those differences, you still have common ground and harmonization.
All right, very good. Jazz hands for our first speaker. Brave, brave position. Thank you. Yes, so I'm now interested in questions for the speaker. If you have a question, raise your Zoom hand. And so that's in your little bar at the bottom. And remember that all questions should be addressed to me. And so let's start with Anne Bradeen. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Madam Chair, I was wondering what the speaker might, or what does a better fight look like, say, around the question of gun control? What would a better fight look like?
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Madam Chair, I believe that healthy conflict, a better fight, so to speak, requires asking curious questions, something that we focus on a lot in Braver Angels. It requires a clarity of understanding of the subject matter that you're talking about. And it does require first that common ground of values and concerns that are shared. But it also means accurately understanding each other and asking questions that are not loaded with intent, and believing in good faith that the person across from you who disagrees with you about gun control wants some of the same things that you do, and in fact values safety just as much as you do, and might just have different opinions about what actually creates a safer environment.
All right, thank you. For another question, we'll go to Maxim Strogan. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Madam Chair, I'm curious, given that I agree with about everything Elizabeth said, I'm curious what the phrase depolarization means in that context. It sounds like we should maintain polarization, but communicate across it.
All right, go ahead.
Madam Chair, when I speak of polarization here, I'm speaking of the affective polarization. It would be more helpful, I think, in some contexts to include affective in front of polarization in more context. However, it does add a lot of words to whatever it is that you are trying to convey. Affective polarization is the attitudes that we hold toward each other, not just differences of opinion. I believe that polarization, as in differences of opinion, will continue to persist. That is the core of healthy conflict, and that is also the core of disagreeing, but respecting each other and caring about each other across divides. That is, to me, the core meaning of being a depolarized person. It is not depolarization from difference. It is depolarization from believing your opponent has evil intent and believing the worst of your opponent's intent.
Very good. And for a final question, we'll go to Mr. Craig Diamond. Go ahead and unmute, ask your question to me.
Madam Chair, does the speaker feel that currently Braver Angels spends too much time trying to pursue harmony? Relative to, better fights.
Great question. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, I believe that we should spend more time focused on better fights. I would not advocate for any less time on harmony. As I said, I believe that both are extremely necessary and they're equally necessary components of political depolarization. So while I might say that proportionally right now, I believe that they are uneven, I would not advocate for any less time spent on one.
Very good. And with that, well, actually, the first thing I'll say is that, Mr. Diamond, your question is one that I think is very good, and I would encourage speakers throughout this debate to speak to it. With that, Ms. Dahl is thanked. One more round of jazz hands for good questions, good answers, following an excellent speech. Okay, we're now going to move on to a first speech in the negative. Mr. Holland, go ahead and unmute. You have 4 minutes.
I must confess that I hate following Elizabeth in a debate because she's a very eloquent speaker. But the proposition of should braver angels focus on creating better fights, not harmony, suggests that braver angels thinks of itself as being about creating harmony, which in my opinion is not at all our core mission focus, which I think accurately stated still remains bridging the partisan divide. This bridging doesn't imply harmony, but rather creating different types of bridges so that we can encounter one another in good faith with our differences, able to be shared without fear, discussed respectfully and with civility, and debated in good faith, focusing on the issues, not the personalities, party politics, etc. To me, anything to do with fighting needs to be flatly rejected. Fighting implies an attitude going in that is antithetical to the concept of creating healthier debates, and it's the kind of rhetoric that drives both reds and blues from our ranks. Frankly, if BA's materials and programming had this creating better fights as a common theme, it probably never would have attracted my personal participation. And if it were to start focusing on concepts like this, it will lose my interest very quickly, I fear. Frankly, I hate this debate topic was even put forth when a question like, should Braver Angels continue its focus on creating healthier debates, to me would have been more in line with our ethos and a more interesting starting point for productive discourse. Also, harmony itself is somewhat off target. We're not looking for a sing-song of kumbaya around the campfire, all peace and love. Disagreement is part of the human condition, and we need to accept it and find ways to temper it. So the focus is on finding common ground, finding solutions, not reacting with anger, emotional outburst, rancor, and outright hatred, treating those we disagree with as the devil incarnate and othering them. Looking at it another way, harmony refers to a state of agreement, unity and peaceful coexistence between people and groups. It's characterized by mutual respect, understanding, and compromise. Harmony is achieved when people work towards a common goal. Conflicts are resolved through peaceful means. Civility, on the other hand, refers to the behavior of individuals in society. It embodies respectful and polite behavior towards others, even in the midst of disagreement or conflict. Civility involves showing consideration for the feelings and rights of others and speaking and acting in a way that promotes harmony and avoids provoking hostility or violence. In essence, harmony refers to a state of peace and unity, while civility refers to the polite and respectful behavior that helps maintain that state of peace and unity. So I suggest Braver Angels is all about helping people develop their skills in civility with the objective of reaching a more harmonious environment for our democratic processes. That said, there is another approach to the matter that would go something like this. As I mentioned, harmony refers to a peaceful and cooperative relationship between individuals and groups. Civility refers to respectful and polite behavior in social interactions and communication. Better fights could be taken to refer to conflicts or disagreements that are handled in a productive and constructive manner rather than turning hostile or aggressive. The key difference between these terms is that harmony and civility are focused on avoiding or preventing conflicts altogether, while one might argue that better fights addresses how conflicts can be managed and resolved in a positive way when they do arise. Engaging in better fights may exacerbate tensions, leading to a further deterioration of relationships and ultimately hindering any possibility of progress. The problem for me is that the risk of an adverse reaction to promoting better fights is, in my humble opinion, high. Excuse me, that's my own alarm going off. So this adverse reaction to promoting better fights is, in my opinion, high, and it doesn't bring any incremental benefit to justify its use. So let's focus on civility, on building bridges from the polarized state that we're in to a more harmonious one for the future.
All right, jazz hands for our spicy first negative. Love it. By the way, I love it when people say, I hate this resolution. I wish it had never been chosen. Thank you for that. I think that's a thing some people feel like they're not allowed to say. Please say it. Like, that's great. I love the honesty. And we're here to talk about it for real. So for our first question, let's take Ms. Dahl. Go ahead.
Madam Speaker, I would like to know whether the prior speaker believes that emphasizing harmony will decrease the likelihood of conflict rather than increase over the long term the likelihood that any conflict which arises will be significantly more violent than it otherwise might be, should it have been addressed in a better fight, as he defined it toward the end of his speech.
All right, go ahead.
That's a good question. Thank you very much for it. Again, I guess what I would like to make clear is I think harmony by itself is a bit of a misnomer. It's not something, it is an endpoint, it is a destination, it's not the road we travel. I personally prefer the use of civility and the concept of building bridges. I don't disagree with you on our need to fully understand the differences and the importance of not letting them be hidden by kumbaya singing around the campfire. It's just a question of how we get there. And my concern is that we have to be very careful about the terminology we use. And to start off with something that says better fights, it's just, to me, it's an escalate. It's something which is an escalator, not a de-escalator.
All right, thank you. For our next question, we will go to the patient Dwayne Wilder. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do a lot of work in racial justice, and I find that often I'm confronted with anger, dissent, and other forms of intransigence, one might even say. And I find that in myself, the attempt to restore order is a request for my own comfort. And so my question to the gentleman is, to what extent in diminishing conflict are we actually looking for our own comfort?
Interesting. Go ahead, Mr. Holland.
To me, it's not a case of diminishing conflict. It's a case of making sure that the conflict doesn't boil over into personal attacks, political attacks, into what might be described as a good fight. Because the minute you let the emotions get involved, then you lose the focus on what your intent is. Your intent is to find ways to reduce the anger, to address the conditions that lead to it, to identify those conditions and try to find a way around them. So I don't think it's a case of ignoring it or trying to make myself or others comfortable by bringing it down. It's more one of reducing the noise that comes from this effective polarization that is so common.
All right, and we'll take one more question from Linda Bergovsky. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to find out if the speaker thinks of harmony the way that I think of harmony, which is in singing, it is the blending of several voices so that the sound you hear is not just an alto or a bass or a soprano. It is a blending of the tones and the words, and they come, and the result is a stronger, more pleasant sound than if those people had sung by themselves. So the idea of harmony is not an end state, it's actually the process of arriving at an improved state. Would the speaker agree? And is that perhaps why he reacted the way he did to the use of the word fights, because harmony has a real meaning to him?
Go ahead.
I think the way I would respond to that is that, in my view, harmony is an endpoint. You don't start out with a group of singers and create harmony immediately. You zigzag to it. You make mistakes are made. Dissonance happens. And my concern with the concept of better fights is that I think the risk is very high that there's way too much dissonance in the process of getting to a point of agreement, a point of comfort, a point of harmony, so to speak, could be lengthened rather than shortened. I don't want to lose sight. I don't want to suggest that I'm against the previous speaker's position on the importance of understanding disagreements, because there are going to be disagreements. But it's when the discussion and the interaction about those disagreements gets out of control that you end up with something which risks the longer term goal of harmony.
All right. And with that, the speaker is thanked. Jazz hands once again, excuse me, for good questions and good answers. Also, pardon me, I can almost never call in all the questioners I want to. And so just know that you can keep raising your hand. Questions can be speeches, and we're going to do our best to get as many voices in as possible. So that having been a fine speech in the negative, we're now looking for another speech in the affirmative. And for that, I'm going to call on Paul Norris. Paul, go ahead. You have 4 minutes.
Yeah, I think there's a real subtlety to this topic, and I've been involved in Braver Angels 5 years now, I think. Geez, maybe more. I don't know. I'm losing track. And it took me a long time to identify this issue in my own mind, and I'll try to explain it. Part of it is, I think, the therapy background of Braver Angels, which has its own cultural bias. And it's not the only tradition that exists for how people can interact productively. I take note, we're trying to set an example for a country that has never been harmonious. Functional, often, yes, but harmonious, never really, or never for very long. And to me, there's this subtle conflict avoidance theme that pervades Braver Angels, including very, very high up in the organization. And I think it propagates itself through the organization. And of course, a lot of people, I've been, largely conflict avoidant, but I see a necessity. And one of the things that became clearer and clearer to me over time was, the necessity of having a willingness to endure discomfort, to have meaningful discussions that actually get somewhere. This is something I think we've been lacking to a large extent. I think I'd also point out that in 2016, when the organization was founded, the approach was very, 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 I think, apropos. And I think it's less so now. I think we have developed a critical mass of people who can have much better conversations. I think we don't have to control things as tightly as we started in the beginning. And there are groups within Braver Angels that prove that every time they meet. So the organization has evolved. I think I would mention that what I don't, I think sometimes we have vagueness and ambiguity rather than real understanding. And I go back and I look at nonviolent communication, which I studied for years, and I still am very much a believer in. But, nonviolent communication can be supportive of the status quo, and it can be used in a subtle way to silence valid concerns. And again, I don't see us as being as open an organization to valid concerns from the minorities within the organization as I would like us to be. Finally, getting close to the end of what I have to say, I would say there is a deeper harmony that you get from accurate disagreement where you have really stated as clearly as you can, and you have worked together with somebody on the other side to come to understand where is it that you actually really disagree. And you get away from, you know, the sound bites that we all know from the news, and you actually get to a deeper discussion. And you still may not be in deep agreement, but you can be friends. You can go out, you can have lunch together. You can actually sometimes even like each other. And the last thing I want to say about this is a little oblique, but I think if we have deeper, stronger discussions, I think we can get past this thing. Everybody has their own facts. I mean, I think there is such a thing as a real fact. I think it's very hard to distinguish a fact from something that you hold deeply as a belief or that you've read 25 times in your favorite news organ. But I think if we really challenge each other, I think we can actually get down to maybe some things that actually are bedrock facts. That's my hope. So that's all I have to say. And oh my gosh, I see I ran over. I thought this was going to be short, and I was 4.5 minutes. Thank you for indulging me, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. You were just getting to the point where I was going to interrupt you. Yeah, jazz hands for an honest speech in the negative. Thank you. And I'm actually
affirmative.
Sorry. Affirmative. Yes, my apologies. And so we're going to take some questions, and I'm going to start with Phil Gerson. You've been patient. Go ahead. Ask your question to me.
Madam Chair, I would like to pose a question to clarify the notion of harmony based on the process, and also understand if this is the Braver Angel recommendation. So I would briefly ask the speaker, let's see, I've forgotten his name.
It's fine. The speaker, Mr. Norris. Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Norris. The first thing, each would give a statement of their values. Secondly, this is important, we have time to question and challenge, to go deeper, to understand the other. But then it becomes important to state the differences of each. So here's where we differ. And then the last thing, which may be called harmony, determine what we can do to transcend differences for the common good. So my question is to Mr. Norris, is that an approach that Braver Angels and you support, or what's your opinion on that process?
I can't speak for Braver Angels, and that was a bit lengthy and had something like about 5 steps. So, okay, 4 steps. So I would say, as an approach, sure. An approach that might work for some people on some occasions, sure. Do I feel bound myself to for that particular approach? No, I do not.
All right. I'm going to jump in here and ask a question, but don't worry, we will still have the same number of questions from the body. I'm wondering, Mr. Norris, if you, and notice I'm the only one who can say you, everybody else, you're doing a great job of putting it in the third person. Thank you. If I appreciate your honesty in referring to your sense that the conflict avoidance negatively affects people who are underrepresented in Braver Angels, perhaps Reds, perhaps voices of color, perhaps strong progressives, whatever. And I'm wondering if you could just say a little more about that experience to help the room understand what you mean. Why is that hard? What does it feel like? What is that?
Wow, what a great question. And I wish I had thought to prepare for that one beforehand. I guess I'll mention, there was this famous experiment, the line experiment done by Ash. This is a psychology experiment from, I think, like 1940, something like that. And what they did was they would have one true experimental subject, in a room full of people who were actually actors. And what they would do is they would put two lines up on the screen that were obviously of different length. Maybe, like one, I don't know, one was like, say, a third as long as the other. And all the actors, and they would say, well, are these two lines the same length? And all the actors were saying, yes, absolutely. And, the person who was the actual subject was sitting there very distressed because they could obviously see that those two lines were of different lengths. Very rarely was a subject able to actually speak up and say that, unless there were two subjects. If there were two subjects, they would catch each other's eyes and they would speak up and say, no, those lines are not the same length. So I think this shows an aspect of group dynamics. So I have often had the experience of being in the room where a bunch of people were just presuming something, or statements were made presuming something with which I deeply disagreed. And I'm happy to say that on occasion, I found the courage to speak up, even without making eye contact with another subject. But other times I did not. And whether it was choice or fear, I don't know. But so it is the feeling of not having a space in which one can fully express one's beliefs and just the subtle pressure of the group. And I think there is a pervasive, not universal, but there's a pretty strong theme running through Braver Angels of let's be nice to each other. Let's not speak up too much. Let's get along.
All right. So we'll take two more questions because I never want mine to take away from the body. Ronald Meck, go ahead and unmute. Ask Neil's question to me.
Hey there. So what I'm wondering, if we're in the polarity of the paradigm of conflict and harmony, which it sounds like we are at the moment, I wonder if these words are mutually exclusive or are not somehow contained within each other. And my question to the speaker is, are a cougar and a deer in conflict or in harmony?
Interesting. Go ahead.
Form is exactly emptiness. Emptiness is exactly form. If that's one of your, favorite sutras, the Heart Sutra, that's a pretty deep question. But I got to say, if I were the deer and the cougar were crunching my neck and, piercing my jugular, I might have a moment where I felt not in harmony with the cougar.
All right. Very good. And for a final question, we'll go to Mimi Yang. Go ahead and unmute. Ask your question to me.
Madam Chair, I have noticed the last speaker and the previous two, the recurrent word is harmony. I have trouble with that because the mission of braver angels, not to seek harmony, but to seek union, to seek unity. So how we can create a less imperfect union. So my question for Mr. Norris is, what's the difference between harmony and the unity? And also, the second question is the better fight is kind of mutually exclusive. When you talk about fight, two sides confronting each other, but you want to confront better. Are you going to create a harmony or you're going to create a unity? Is that what they're seeking?
So typically we only get one question, but I'll let that one slide. No, you're good.
Sorry, the first question.
Yes, we'll go with that. Mr. Norris, if you want to answer both, feel free, but particularly the first one.
Yeah, so, unity versus harmony. Again, I think I go back to something that I said in my speech, which is this nation has never been harmonious, ever, and yet it has been a functional nation, at least for a lot of history. I don't know if I'll go into whether we're functional right now. So I think actually, I question whether harmony is really a valid goal, and I think we all love to feel harmony. I love feeling harmony with my blue friends and my red friends. But I don't think it's the goal. I think it's a benefit when it shows up, but neither a goal nor is it necessary.
All right. And with that, Mr. Norris is thanked. Jazz hands once again for a courageous speech and courageous questions and answers. I'm now looking for a speech in the negative. Yes, the negative. And let's go to Joy Olson. Go ahead and unmute. You have 4 minutes. After this, we'll shorten to 3.
I'm not in the negative. I'm afraid that's an error. I don't
Okay,
think
thank
that's
you. Thanks for correcting us. So sorry. Then let's go to Michael Abramson. Go ahead and unmute. 4 minutes for you. Mr. Abramson. Still not hearing you, sir. I wonder if this is a tech issue. Michael Abramson, last call. All right. While you work on the tech side, Mr. Abramson, we're going to go to Stacy Tonneson. I will also note that some folks are chatting to their whips and saying, I really have a question. You can make a speech that is a question to the body. And so, Stacy, I know some of your comments may come in that form. That's fine. So Stacy, go ahead and unmute. You have 4 minutes. This is unusual. All right. I rarely have this, we rarely have this problem. Okay, so apparently there's some tech stuff going on tonight. I think what I'll take right now is anyone who, Michael Abramson, you are still welcome to go ahead and unmute, but anybody who would like to speak in the negative, go ahead and raise your Zoom hand. Michael Johnson, is that what you're up for? Speech in the negative? You're still muted, my friend.
No, I was actually having a question that was not negative or positive, but it was to explore something that Mr. Norris was saying. But could it be addressed to other speakers as well?
So if you're up for it, I would love to hear you. So we're now in the speech section, not the question section. However, what I'd love for you to do, if you think that your question would move the conversation forward, is just share it and share a little bit about where it's coming from. And we'll have that be our next speech. By the way, I should say, I think there are probably a lot of people, there are always some folks who are neither affirmative nor negative, maybe especially quite a few of y'all are in the room tonight. If that's the case, we still want to hear your speech or your comment or your question. Just raise your hand wherever it seems most appropriate. So Mr. Johnson, go ahead and you'll be our next speech.
Okay, thank you. It seems to me that there's some real tension between where people want braver angels to go and what we tend to do is to put it into, well, we should do this or we should do that. And I was wondering if anyone has really thought about the possibility of different approaches being developed concurrently. There's people who really want to follow harmony, and others who want to follow conflict, et cetera, has anyone thought about really doing both or all or 3 or 4, and then being able to exchange information about the experience? Check.
Right. Awesome, thank you. I'm guessing the hands raised right now are not questions for this speaker, but if they are, show me your actual hand and I'll call on you. If not, so I actually have a question for you, Mr. Johnson, which is, I really appreciate you raising that. I think that one of the central things going on in this debate is that a a lot of folks probably have in their minds, why can't we just do both of these? And I guess I'd like to ask, oh, it looks like Jay Olson raised your actual hand. I'll call on you in just a second. But just to finish my question, I'd like to ask you, Mr. Johnson, if you can relate to the dynamic where if we all are sort of living in a space where we want to be nice to each other, we don't want to fight, somebody could feel like their like sort of disagreeable opinion, but that they really feel strongly about isn't welcome, and how you would sort of help that person move through that. Just sort of pulling on Mr. Norris's idea.
Okay, it's a very good question. And the way in which I would try to go about it is to get the group to recognize that this person has something to say. It's contrary to what seems to be the consensus. Let us give that person the space, and that our objective at the beginning is to do our best to hear and understand, and then see what conversation follows from that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, a good answer. Yeah, you're getting some jazz hands. So Jay Olson, you raised your actual hand as a question for this speaker. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Oh, yes, Madam. I think it was when you were asking whether, I thought you were asking for some elaboration or agreement with what he was, with the question of whether we could have sort of different groups. And I think that, I don't know if this is a question, I guess I thought it was more of a comment, but I think that that is where a lot of people would like to go. Once we've understood how to do the Braver Angels sort of communication in a way that doesn't trigger others and doesn't let our triggers go flaring, what we're left with, though, is the sense that we still aren't very well understood if we're not actually talking about some of the issues. And to me, the question, tonight when we said fights, that isn't exactly the word I would have chosen, but a little chewier discussion and issues, which I think Mr. Johnson was also saying, could some of us want to do that? And if that was his question, I think some people do want to do that. I remember the first Red Blue workshop I ever experienced, I did it as an observer. And one of the people at the end was a younger woman, and I hope I'm not speaking out of school, but this stuck with me so much, is that she said, what I learned from this experience is that I need to know more about what my side really believes and really values. Because what she had discovered is she really couldn't articulate it very well. And I think part of
this is a question. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's not a question. I thought you asked whether we, but I think people do want to move to that next stage where they explore what they believe and share it and learn about it as they are maybe debating, maybe arguing, but much more deeply than a lot of our exercises have let us do.
All right, so Mr. Johnson, what do you think about that?
Two responses. One, I think there is two very radically different approaches. One says, you trigger me, and the other one says, I trigger me. So, in other words, when I trigger me means I take full responsibility for whatever response I have. Now, we have a problem, but when I think I trigger me, you have a different kind of discussion than the other one. So those are two lines of approach that could be explored and to see where that comes from. And so I had kind of a response to the second part of her presentation, which is very interesting, but I kind of lost it in the. But anyway, it's I've been in this business for 40 years and I still have so much to learn, but face-to-face communication is absolutely fundamental. And we just really have to look at it in terms, we have to learn, explore, and share, and see where this all takes us, one step at a time.
Great. Travis, I know you want to give a speech. Mike, is yours a question or a speech? Mike Scheffler.
Mine is also a speech.
Okay. In that case, we're going to have that as our final question. And with that, we will thank the speaker. Jazz hands for Mr. Johnson. Thanks, everybody. Very good. So I'm now looking for a speech in the affirmative, and I'm going to challenge the group to, and I see quite a few folks who want to speak in the affirmative, and that's great. Because I want to challenge the group to understand this resolution a bit as these two things are in tension. Like, the idea here is Braver Angels should move more in the direction of better fights as opposed to harmony. I know that a lot of us want to say both, but because I'm seeing so much in the affirmative and not as much in the negative, I just want to encourage us to understand it that way, to try to really get at this tension. So, Monteleone, Travis Monteleone, is that how you say your name? I love it. Go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
3 minutes.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, happy to speak in the affirmative. I mean, I think these strategy questions are really, really interesting. So I'm glad that this is the topic. I think to take a step all the way back, I think the biggest question we can be thinking about is what is Braver Angels' goal as an organization? And is the goal to be basically a club for people who are already generally centrist and generally harmonious, and for those people in the club to hone those skills and work together and make friendships and build community? That's a fine goal, but that is going to be inherently a more insular and smaller community. Or is the goal to be more outward looking and to start, truly a national movement with tens of millions of people, rallying behind a banner and making real change for polarization? And if that's the goal, then I think we need to be looking outward a lot more rather than focusing on, internal community building. And so how this relates to, the level of harmoniousness, whenever your main, selling point is we're an organization that builds harmony, what you're doing is attracting people who are generally already pretty harmonious. It's not, like a bunch of really intense partisans are seeing that and saying, oh, this is the organization for me. I can't wait to go sign up for Braver Angels. Of course, they're not saying that because they're not inherently interested in harmony. And so if that's your main selling point, it would make sense that you haven't reached a lot of partisans. And so if we want to reach, the true fringes and really create a national movement that decreases polarization at the extremes, then we're going to have to be a little bit more combative, right? We have to, in a way, take the fight to the fringes. And so if, we can all agree that we want to be outward looking and to create this national movement, which I think generally is how most people think about the goal of Braver Angels, then we should look at some stats to see, how successful are we in bringing the fight, so to say, to the fringes. And so, one of the favorite Braver Angels stats is that 87% of Americans think that polarization is an existential threat to their way of life. And so America recognizes that it's a massive problem that needs fixing. I mean, that's 290 million Americans who agree on this one point. Braver Angels has, I maybe off the top of my head, 20,000, 30,000 members, right? And so this is 0.01% of our target market, the people who should be most interested in getting behind something like Braver Angels. And so what that means is that there's got to be something wrong with the product that we're offering, right? There's something in our product suite that the market is not positively responding to. You can think about it like, if we knew for a fact, if we were a car company, we knew for a fact that there were 290 million Americans who wanted to buy a car, and we were the most well-known car company with the best car, but only 30,000 people had bought our car, right? There's still something wrong with our car. We got to be tweaking it. And so I'm not saying we need to get rid of all Braver Angels programming. Obviously, however many members we have, it's great that we're all really, connected and enjoy what we're doing here. But at the same time, we need to add something that speaks to the other, 289,970,000 people who recognize that polarization is bad, but aren't being attracted to the current offerings that Braver Angels have. So I'll wrap up there. That was the main point, is that we need something, additional outside of the harmony that we've been pitching so far.
Great, thank you. Jazz hands for an interesting speech in the affirmative. The bold new point. I'm also just gonna say to folks that you don't need to raise your hand to give a speech. You need to chat to your whip, because they'll put you in our queue, and then we'll call on you that way. So if you have your Zoom hand up, I'm going to assume it's because you want to ask a question of this speaker. And so let's start with Samantha Corey. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Okay. First of all, Madam Chair, I agree with this speaker. But here's my question, because I believe that a lot of times we lose our chance to actually solve problems by trying to seek harmony through compromise. I'd like to ask this speaker, do you feel like compromise is just one way to deflect conflict, but is not really true harmony? It's sort of a giving up of a stance, or giving up part of a stance. And so even if we hear from both sides, we lose that. And as one of the speakers mentioned, harmony is reached by working toward a common goal, but a lot of debates do not start out with a common goal, and yet the debate needs to happen. So I agree with the speaker, but I'd like to hear what he has to say about compromise as one of the tools that we use.
Great, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. I mean, I think compromise and harmony, while in principle, we've all, come to understand that these are in general positive words, they can have a downside also, a real downside. And that downside is that, again, if your selling point as an organization is harmony and compromise, you're immediately turning away people who aren't interested in that. And those people tend to be the people who are the most polarized and are the most in need to hear a message of turning away from polarization. And so we really, as an organization, in my opinion, need to think about what is our core message that we are going out into the world with. If it's a message of let's all get along and be buddy, a majority of Americans think that the other side of the aisle is evil, literally, right? Like people are so existentially worried, right, in their own minds. They are fighting an existential, apocalyptic, good versus evil narrative that's been sold to them by the media or politicians or whoever. And so if we're coming along as an organization and our message is, well, actually, you can just get along with the other side, most people just aren't going to buy it. And so I think what that means is that we can't just come with a message of harmony. We have to come with a message of combativeness and say, no, you're wrong about the other side. Here's why. And not be afraid to debate partisans and turn them back, from the brink, from the edge of extreme partisanship. So, harmony definitely has a downside, and that is, coming across as too weak to people who have already written off harmony.
All right, and good. You got Jan's hands from your questioner. That's good. Ms. Dahl, go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me. Unmuting is very hard, I know.
There we go. Sorry, it's harder on my phone. Madam Speaker, I would like to ask, doesn't the previous speaker agree that it is in fact quite necessary to engage partisans with healthy conflict rather than seeking harmony? Because after all, people who are partisans and partisan activists who we would like to see depolarize in their attitudes toward people who disagree with them, believe that there is right and wrong, and they believe that they are right. It is non-persuasive to them to ask them to compromise their values, is it not? Then if we should want to, in fact, defang effective polarization, we should recognize, I believe, and wouldn't the speaker agree, that politics is an adversarial game. In elections, there are winners and there are losers. Policy either passes or fails. And ultimately, even when people largely share the same goals, the same people have vast and passionate disagreements about how best to accomplish those goals. Partisans know this.
This
and
is my
partisans
favorite answer to the question that I think I've ever heard. However, I am going to make you wrap up and make it a question.
Partisans know this, and partisans are best persuaded to join Braver Angels. Don't you agree, dear speaker? Not by an appeal to harmony, but to conflict with their perspective on another's belief or intent.
All right. Go ahead, Mr. Monteleone. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, 100%. I agree. I mean, that was my whole point. And so I think that maybe you were giving me a softball, and I thank you for that. I mean, yes, if we again come across and our message is harmony, it's not going to resonate with partisans who are interested in winning and losing. And so the way you bring partisans back from the brink is by meeting them at their level and winning. And what exactly that message is, I think it's something that Braver Angels should have some type of group or committee come together and think through, what is the most effective way in a simple message? How can we distill, the mountains of academic research on polarization? How can we distill that to a 3-point plan so that any person can go out to their church group or their, school board and talk to people one-on-one, not even about Braver Angels, but just about polarization, and bring people back from the brink of extreme polarization. If Braver Angels can put together, so-called like missionaries or something who can go out into communities and start a true national movement by speaking simply about polarization and really debating partisans about their polarized views and bringing them back. I mean, that's how you win. It's not by selling harmony to people who don't want to buy it. So yes, I agree with the question asker. That requires a certain level of combativeness. It also requires a certain level of simplicity, but definitely it requires Braver Angels going out into communities and being combative, and that's what's needed to start a movement.
All right, and with that, the speaker is thanked. I know that there are folks, jazz hands one more time for good questions and good answers. I know there are folks who've been raising their hands multiple times for questions. Please keep going. I'm going to try to get to all of you. But for now, I'm going to, you'll notice me taking slightly fewer questions and being a little bit more like particular about time, because there's so many, there are just clearly quite a few folks who want to speak right now. And so we're going to say 30 seconds for a question and 1 minute for an answer. And our speeches are going to be 2 minutes, 3 minutes. We're still in the 3-minute phase. So I'm looking for a speech in the negative, and I'm going to go to Roy Vela. Mr. Vela, go ahead and unmute. You have 3 minutes.
Sure. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so it's in the negative because I somewhat contest the question. I think the resolution is challenging. And the reason I have that opinion is that I think that harmony doesn't mean agreement, in my opinion. And harmony for me is the classic. So I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, and we used to love to say that we're more of a salad than a melting pot, right? That people came and retained their identities, and yet they became New Yorkers. Like people, my family, all my grandparents in through Ellis Island waved at the Statue of Liberty, and New York is full of people who are different from each other, celebrate their differences, but the day they arrive, they say, I'm a New Yorker, right? So they have their own language, they have their own food, their own culture and everything else, but they immediately become part of it. And you know, harmony for me in this regard. So I don't think we need more fights. I think there's plenty of venues for fighting. As far as I can tell, that's the majority of what the US offers at this point, is a place to fight. If you want to have a fight, there's plenty of that. I don't think we need to offer that. I think we need to appreciate harmony to the extent that I'm not telling the flutes to play low notes and I'm not telling the tubas to play high notes, right? Like, harmony is about difference coming together and appreciating what each element brings to the mix, right? I'm not trying to get people to change their opinion necessarily. They may come closer. What I'm trying to do is reduce dissonance, not change. I don't need all tubas or all flutes. Like, that doesn't make any sense, right? The orchestra is a combination of very, very different elements that resonate, right? And frankly, that's what America has done more than any other country. We've taken people from all over the world for our entire history and let them remain different and yet resonate with each other and get things done. I mean, someone else mentioned being effective, right? And, you know, I think it was Paul, I think, you know, Mr. Norris said that we don't agree necessarily, but we're pretty effective as a country. And so I don't think I would enjoy Braver Angels saying, you know, come here to fight. I think it would be, come here to tell us why you're right and what your opinion is, because we want to hear it. And we want to figure out how that opinion fits in with everyone else's. And that's, I think I'm done.
All right, jazz hands. Very good, thank you. So for our first question, we will go to the very patient, Ms. Charlotte Bark. Go ahead and unmute, ask your question to me.
I think I'm unmuted. Okay, Madam Speaker, it sounds to me like a lot of the discussion might be with the word fight, and I'm wondering for the speaker if he's really okay with having deeper, more dissident discussion, but the word fight is such an emotional fight and harmony is more of a less emotional. Like, is there something other than the word fight that would lead to deeper or more dissident conversation? Is there another word to use besides fight? And is that part of the issue with this conversation?
Yeah, so I agree with you. In fact, I think part of my attraction to Braver Angels has been the word debate, that people come in to a debate with opposite views and have a reasoned discussion, a passionate discussion, but a reasoned discussion debating an issue. I think that's more coherent for me than better fights in terms of terminology. So you're right. I'm probably reacting to that because all we see nowadays is a lot of people just screaming at each other and very few people listening. So yes.
Great. All right, and for a final question, Mr. Davis, go ahead and unmute, ask your question to me.
Yes, Madam Chairman, thank you very much. My question is, how do we bring in harmony when our society as a whole and most of our organizations are segregated by race and economic conditions, and a lot of people are left out? And how do we examine this organization, for instance, in that regard?
All right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair point. I think we don't have enough diversity of views in this organization. That's fairly clear to most people who participate with any regularity. And for me, the harmony thing is about distilling commonality, right? So it's not about changing opinion from A to B, but saying, actually, we both agree on C, right? It's kind of right down the middle between us, right? It's not. And I do think you're right that we do need to, and Travis is 100% right. We need to attract more diversity of opinion. Maybe it's more extreme, maybe it's less extreme, maybe it's just different. And then figure out what's the same. My last comment, April, is I lived in London for the last 12 years. If you dropped Democrats and Republicans into any European parliament, they are side by side, dead in the middle, because there are literally communists and fascists in parliament. Like, you know, the number of issues that we differ on, it's like a handful, which means we agree on most, you know, but we make the earth move for the handful of issues that we disagree on, right? And so I do think we need to get more recognition of the commonality, which is basically telling people, we want to hear your radical view, bring it in, we need to hear it, you know. Yeah.
Right, sounds great. With that, the speaker is thanked.
Thank you.
Jazz hands, yes, very good. So we're now going to go to a speech in the affirmative from Mr. Dwayne Wilder. Go ahead and unmute, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. What I would like to say is that many times people who speak out of a sense of conflict are not even speaking for themselves. They are speaking out of an experience of their community, particularly when that community has been disadvantaged. And our insistence that things be orderly and polite to them, and perhaps in fact, is an expression of privilege and rank. Rank is the sum of all one's privileges. And so I think that it would be best if we honored conflict. It's been pointed out that fight is kind of a fighting word, and I agree. But often people can be quite angry without knowing themselves that they are speaking out of the anger of a whole community. And so trying to address that person's issues or say soothing things to them is completely beside the point, because they are speaking from a larger context than we are willing to acknowledge. And I will end with that.
Very good, thank you. Jazz hands for Mr. Wilder. Yes, questions for the speaker. I will start with Elizabeth Christensen. This is a question for the speaker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is, isn't that the Braver Angels method, though, to only represent yourself and not represent any other organization, group, or community? And don't we need to teach people to dig deeper and find what they individually truly believe, instead of trying to speak for a community who may or may not agree with them?
Interesting, go ahead.
Well, thank you for the question. It's a very good question. Often people have to speak for their community because there is no other acknowledgement of them than you're a member of this community. And my progressive and lefty friends used to say during the campaign for election in 2016, I don't understand how anybody in their right mind can vote for Trump, which was not an expression. They thought it was an expression of wisdom, but actually it was just an expression of their ignorance. But they kept on thrusting that upon people as if they needed to explain why people voted for Trump. And so that thrust those people into a very defensive posture, in which whenever they spoke in the name of all those who agreed with them. I didn't vote for Trump, but I wanted to have conversations to find out what interested people in Trump, rather than how in the world could you vote for Trump?
Great. That was a short speech, so I think we'll take 2 more questions. And I'm going to start with Craig Diamond, or go next to Craig Diamond. Go ahead and ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, as I was listening to the speaker, I thought that one of the challenges of making Braver Angels programming, even like, for example, debates that we have, is if you have a format and we've got 80 people who were trying to have a discussion, whether it's an animated discussion or angry or not angry, whatever it is, there's a certain amount of whatever word you want to call it, civility, that you have to have in order even to have a conversation with 80 people. And so I think it's part of the issue is, how do you have a balance? So I'm just wondering, the speaker could speak to that sort of challenge. That's my question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. An excellent question. I think when confronted by anger and conflict, part of being braver is being willing to sit with that heat, to acknowledge it, to ask questions that might affirm its legitimacy or explore its legitimacy, and to genuinely entertain the conflict itself, the heat itself, the anger itself, rather than trying to say, well, let's do something that'll restore, Robert's Rules of Order here. Because Robert's Rules of Order and our own notion of orderly process is inherently a cultural artifact that is so broad that we don't even know it's there. It's like asking a fish what water tastes like. And we need to move in a direction where other cultures are free to speak in the way they speak. Not to take over, of course, any more than we want to take over, but to be ready to meet someone else where that someone else is.
Very good. And for a final question, Mr. John Scheinman, go ahead and unmute. Ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate very much the discussion that's gone on so far, and the previous speaker was very clear. The problem that I have, and I wish that he or someone else might address it, is during this last hour and a half, nobody has addressed the issue of actual what is a fact. And in fact, that seems to be the hardest part of starting a discussion, wherein people confuse the issue of fact with their opinion. In other words, they don't identify when they say this fact is this and this is that what they're speaking is an opinion rather than a fact. And so I guess my hardest problem is understanding how to help communicate so that we actually do identify the facts, so that we can get beyond that to the opinion business.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wilder, go ahead.
I must say I don't quite understand the question at all. I'm speaking out of a history of dealing with people's anger and their wish for me to understand their anger, and my asking them for facts in the beginning before it's established that I'm with them about their anger, even if it's an anger directed personally at me. If I ask for facts too soon, it is experienced as diversionary, because what they really want is for at last to have somebody really hear them.
All right. And with that, the speaker is thanked. Jazz hands for an interesting new note. Thank you. Okay, I'm now looking for a speech in the negative, and we're going to go to Phil Gerson. Go ahead and unmute. And this is the point in the hour, or the point in the evening where we're shifting to 2-minute speeches. So just to try to get as many voices in as possible. So Mr. Gerson, go ahead and unmute. You have 2 minutes.
I've forgotten what affirmative and negative really is, which side we're talking about. But one concept that we haven't talked about is the concept of democracy to frame a discussion. So I like the term heated and informed debate in terms of instead of fight. But a lot of the problems that we have is some people embrace what a true democracy is, and other people just express their opinion and their grievances. So, for example, I don't know the exact laws in Kansas, Texas, and Florida, but Kansas, we know that the vote for abortion, the majority wanted an option for choice. Okay, but I don't know now whether they have a law for abortion that limits abortion. But what we have is a violation of what a true democracy is. In other words, and in a lot of these states, they've passed abortion laws without polling the populace to see what they want. So right now we have a lot of articles that differentiate the notion of democracy versus fascism. And what we see in many states is that you can't say certain things, that if you seek help for a person needing an abortion, vigilantes can arrest you and so forth. So I'm saying we need clarity through heated debate about making sure people understand and want to sustain a democracy. I'll leave it there.
All right, I will take one question here from Mr. Michael Johnson. Go ahead and unmute, ask your question to me.
The question is Madam Chair, how does the speaker define democracy?
All right.
Well, very, very simply, that in a democracy, the majority vote rules. So therefore, when issues are brought out to the public and people vote, then that's a democratic process. And in general, our elections normally follow a democratic process, but issues don't necessarily get dealt with in a democratic ways. There's ways that others can make decisions without going out to the people.
All right, and just because we're short on time, we're gonna wrap there. So for the speech. So with that, the speaker is thanked. Jazz hands. And we're gonna move right along. Like I said, we're in the section of the debate where we try to get as many folks in as possible. So I'm now looking for a speech in the affirmative from Nate Smolinski. Go ahead and unmute. You have 2 minutes.
I did leave the comment to the whip that I'd switched over to the negative, so I do apologize for the confusion there.
No problem, thank you. Let's go to Elizabeth Christensen. Go ahead.
Thank you. I want to go back to the original resolution. Braver Angels should focus on creating better fights, not harmony. My thoughts here build on the original speakers, what I heard there. Are we really at a point in Braver Angels where we all have civil conversation? I think that to grow the organization as we are trying to do, we are constantly bringing in new people who have not learned this process of how to have civil conversation. And so we need to teach them how to do that. Additionally, in the Braver Angels workshops, which form a large foundation of how we teach people how to have civil conversation, everybody does not get to express themselves fully, authentically, and completely and feel like they have been heard. Too many observers, too few speakers, and too many observers often leave me feeling frustrated that I didn't get to express myself in that point of view. So I think that per the question, should Braver Angels focus on, I think that we need to focus on the better fight, the better conflict, whatever word you want to use there, because it is the process. And like one of the original speakers said, harmony is the conclusion, and however you want to define that also. But the process, we as Braver Angels, I feel, need to focus on the process and teaching people how to do that. And excuse me, not on the conclusion of where we want to get to with those conversations.
All right, interesting. Jazz hands for the our speech and informative. I'm going to take one question from BJD. Go ahead and mute. Ask your question to me. BJD, you've got one more chance. Go ahead and unmute. There we go.
I'd like, Madam Chair, I'd like to ask the speaker if she perceives that fights, that giving people skills to do better fights is something that is just, is the mission of Braver Angels just to do that for participants of people who have already joined? I think that my concern, and I want to know if she shares it, is that the fights are already here. And I happen to live in a community that is deeply polarized by, it's hard to even talk about it, vitriolic fights. And is there a role in Braver Angels for helping provide skills to those of us that, you know, have to watch those and have to be a part of those and can maybe contribute to toning down those? So thank you.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you. And I 100% agree with you that Braver Angels is teaching how to have the better fights, the better conflicts. We as members learn that and then take it out into the community to be able to do that better. And I've long had the question, how do we do that if I've learned how to fight better, but I am having a conversation with somebody who hasn't learned these traits and techniques? And that's a problem that with the Braver Angels methods, with what we are trying to teach here through the workshops and through the alliances, we can then address that and help others come to that who didn't know that they needed to get there. And that's starting in the basic foundational belief that we all want to reach harmony. And I like that description as a salad more than a soup. Harmony of working together with our differences. And so you have to learn how to do that in order to get there. And yes, I think that Braver Angels focusing on teaching the members that then we take it out into the community.
All right, very good. With that, the speaker is thanked. Jazz hands, yes. All right, we're close to wrapping up. We'll take a few more speeches. I'm always interested in people who switch sides. So Mr. Smolinski, you said you're now in the negative.
I did.
Go ahead and unmute. You've got 2 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, and just to explain sort of my wavering, and I think a lot of us struggle with the semantics of this particular topic of discussion as far as what constitutes harmony and what constitutes a fight, and if they are even necessarily exclusive. But upon reframing it to thinking about what is the discourse that we seek, going from my own experience of driving towards more policy rather than philosophically based discourse, I think one of the targets is ultimately a conversation where, to give an example, if you have an issue of labor unions, one side is going to adamantly say, look, if we grant more power here, here's the potential for abuse, here's the potential for error, here is what can go wrong, and speaking often fervently, often from a great place of passion, this is the potential for error in this direction, while the other side presents the same in the other direction. Cohesively, these create a robust sort of platform for solving problems. If the idea is to share perspectives in a way, I guess, with the mindset of painting a more complete picture. And with that in mind, I do see that as ultimately a goal of harmony. And perhaps in talking about that, I may suggest a way that Brave Angels can drive towards a more harmony focus. At the same time, again, it is contentious. It is often passionate, it is fervent, it is a fight, and it is a better fight than what we are dealing with now. So while I believe that driving towards harmony is a goal and should be a great goal, again, I don't know that these are necessarily exclusive points, and I think the semantics do confuse this particular topic of discussion slightly. Thank you.
All right, very good. We'll take one question from Grace Jonachek, I'm guessing is how we say that. Go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. That was good. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering if the speaker can address if there's some issues where it isn't possible to come to a compromise, either due to different sets of facts or different opposing principles, where having that discussion is not necessarily helpful for being able to come to a productive conclusion.
Go ahead.
I do believe there is such a set of issues. I wouldn't necessarily say that there isn't, but I'd say the set is smaller than people may assume. When we deal with moral issues, if we look at the question beyond the question of how policy effectively acts, and how if we take people's moral concern about policy as a particular end, that people will be dissatisfied, that people will feel that their morality is violated, then we can do a more apples to apples, big picture assessment. And I do believe that that kind of harmonious conversation is possible in more places than we give it credit for.
All right, with that, the speaker is thanked. Jazz hands one more time. Yes, for a lot of nuance here. Really quickly, so I think we'll do one or maybe two more speeches depending on time, but I just want to share really quickly. I know that these words have been frustrating to a lot of people, fight and harmony, and I just want to share that they were chosen with the intent to sort of pull apart the two sides of a spectrum so that we can examine the tension. And so I understand that it may seem like we're talking about semantics. I actually think that sometimes in debates, the disagreement is inside a word or inside how people think about it. And so I just want to say that y'all are doing really well handling words that I actually think we do define somewhat differently. And so I appreciate everybody working with this and know that when we create resolutions, we sometimes do so knowing that it's going to sound like we're debating the words, but that sometimes we think there is actually substance there. Doesn't mean you have to agree with us. You can still hate it. It's fine. But anyway, with that, I'm going to go to a speech in the affirmative from Mr. Tsai. Jade Tsai, go ahead and mute in 2 minutes.
Madam Chair, I wanted to respond to, I was thinking sort of about along the same lines of whether we're arguing about semantics between two sort of ambiguously defined terms, such as better fights and harmony. We've seen harmony defined as sort of sharing agreements, but we've also seen harmony defined as a salad and not a soup, where we can have different opinions, but still have some sort of civility. And in turn, we've seen better fights be defined as like emotionally charged conflicts, or we've seen better fights be defined as sort of seeing where we differ. And I think the discussion we've been having is productive, because to me, I'm arguing in the affirmative because we need to see where our disagreements lie. And a lot of the times I can be confused between what we're trying to define and the actual components of what we disagree in. Like we see this, especially like when we talk about binary conflicts like pro-life or pro-choice, these very binary, ambiguously defined terms. And there's, as you've been saying, sort of more of a spectrum, because there might be specific points on the pro-life and pro-choice scale that we disagree on or agree on. And by sort of framing it as a binary between the two, it leads to, we're not actually going to be fighting, we're not going to be realizing what we're fighting about, because we're just going to be talking about semantics. And so to me, a big part of depolarizing these conversations is sort of focusing less on these big ambiguous terms and more on the specific things that we actually should be talking about.
All right, very good. Jazz hands, yep, thank you so much. You also reminded me that usually I just shouldn't say anything, and because it will come out in the debate. Great job, thank you. We'll take a question from Cherie Gravely or Gravely. Go ahead.
Yes, it's Sherry. So, Madam. Yes, so I think Jay brought up something that's been on my mind, and I hope I want to ask him a question about the substance of it. You know, do we grow from things that are easy or from things that are challenging? And I think what Jay expressed was throwing around broad stroke stuff that's easy to kind of agree with or not agree with isn't probably as formative or as developing or as educational in a sense as actually talking with deeper meaning. So you brought up abortion, for example, you know, pro-choice, pro-life, you know, so are you talking about at 6 weeks or at 40 weeks, right? There's different, and that's a good conversation, but when you throw away those. So I'm curious, and you're a young person, so it's great to ask you, do you think you learn from the easy things or from the hard things? And maybe I'm saying the easy things are kind of not fighting, harmony. The hard thing is kind of fighting or controversing or disagreeing. So that's my question for the speaker.
Thank you. To respond to the question, I would say that sometimes it is easier to sort of frame an argument into binary components. But however, that will generally, in my opinion, it leads to making the conversation a lot harder to not only resolve, but just to understand where our disagreements lie. And so it's less about, I do think people aren't just trying to take the easy route when they define sort of their opinion on a binary scale. It's more just about when we're trying to either understand where we disagree with our opposition or trying to convince our opposition where they're wrong. It's just more useful simply to talk about specific components rather than, and a spectrum rather than a binary scale of like yes or no.
All right, and we're gonna take one more question and then we'll wrap from Mr. Kaufman. You've been patient, go ahead and unmute, ask your question to me.
Madam Chair, first I want to commend the speaker's very well thought out, nuanced argument, and commend him for his presentation. I personally agree with you. When you approach someone with your side of a binary argument, that's under the best of circumstances going to turn into a walk away deal where nobody agrees to anything, and it can get much worse than that. But when you allow them to speak, articulate the nuances of what it is they have to say, that gives you ammunition to pull that in and say, well, I agree with that part too. And as soon as you can get that line in, I agree with that part too. Now you're talking to a negotiator, not an enemy. And so I very much support your approach to this.
All right.
And in the form of a question, in the form of a question, do more.
Wait, sorry, what was the question?
Well, the question is, I'm impressed with your approach to it, and I think that all of us should be doing more of what you're doing.
Great. And
going
so
nuance.
Yeah, so maybe just say a little more, Mr. Tsai. I'll say this is
and listen a little more.
Yeah. One sort of important thing that I feel comes when we sort of go away from these binary concepts is we stop this sort of moralistic condemnation of our opposition, right? When we treat a topic such as pro-life or pro-choice, whichever side we side on, we're gonna say that the other side is acting amorally. But when we actually see where we disagree, we both have these sort of moral values, and it's about the premises of these moral values, right? The question for abortion specifically, like it almost becomes a question of whether there's an intrinsic utility of life or not. And when we see that that's where we disagree, it becomes less of one side is moral, one side is amoral, but we both just have different moral norms. And that's where the discussion should be held, rather than over one side saying, I'm just morally superior to the other.
all righty. And with that, the speaker is thanked. Jazz hands for a wonderful final speech of the night. Thank you.